Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Medhurst. I'm here with my dear friend, Professor Said Mohammad Marandi. He's joining me from Tehran. He's a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he's accompanied previous delegations during the Iran nuclear talks as a media advisor. You've seen him on the BBC, on CNN, and Al Jazeera, and pretty much every network that you can think of. Thanks for coming on, Professor. It's great to speak with you and to have you on again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Last time we saw each other was in Tehran right after President Raisi and the foreign minister passed away. They died in a helicopter crash, and that was quite a shock. But within 50 days, snap presidential elections, a new president with a runoff vote as well. I mean, that was quite efficient and democratic, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it showed both the strength of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it also showed how well the Constitution works. In the past, we had a president and a prime minister. In the 1980s, we had a prime minister in the old Constitution, which was changed somewhat by popular vote. Those terrorists, of course, reside in the West as we speak.
You had a prime minister before we couped him as well. but that's pre-revolution. Forgive me for interrupting.
Yeah, so the president and the prime minister, they were assassinated. They were murdered by terrorists that are based in the West today.
Yeah.
And we had elections back then, and they were swiftly replaced. And we've also, the head of the judiciary was murdered at that time in a separate terrorist attack by the same group, also that based in the West. And of course, in Imam Khomeini, who was the founder of the revolution, when he passed away, immediately the Council of Experts, an elected body, they chose a new leader. They have the authority to choose and remove leaders. So in the past, it always functioned well. And this time around, as the world moved towards greater chaos, we saw that the Islamic Republic was capable of very swiftly having new elections. And as you saw in Tehran, things were very normal. The government was functioning normally. There was only one day off for the funeral in Tehran. But now we've had 2 rounds of elections, and hopefully in the near future, the new president will take office, and then we'll have his government he'll send their names to parliament, and once they're approved, his new cabinet will be in power as well.
Professor, if I can just draw the contrast between the elections in England and Iran, because they've happened a few days apart, so we must. In England, in Britain, we have Keir Starmer, who's been elected with one of the lowest voter turnouts since the 19th century. Let me repeat that, one of the lowest voter turnout since the 19th century. And the media call that a Labour landslide, even though he himself and the Labour Party as a whole both received less votes than they did in 2017 and 2019 under Jeremy Corbyn, which back then the media called a failure. So Keir Starmer's mandate is paper thin. He has no legitimacy, and yet the media are backing him. That was a turnout of 60%. It's not much higher than Iran's 50%, but the media spin is entirely different. When it comes to Iran, they've been saying all sorts of things. I mean, what is your reaction to the difference between these two?
Well, when it comes to Iran, no matter what the turnout and no matter who wins, they will depict it as a defeat for Iran. That is always the case. When Ahmadinejad won, they said that people voted for him because they were protesting against the corrupt regime. When Rouhani won, they said they voted for him because he was they were voting for him because they were protesting against the regime, as they like to call it. When Khatami won, they say the same thing.
Yeah.
When the turnout is high, they'll say it's a protest vote. When it's low, they'll say people are protesting. It doesn't matter what happens. The reason why the turnout was lower than usual, and has been for a couple of years, is because partially it is voter apathy. The sanctions have been hurting ordinary Iranians for a long time. Of course, you've been to Iran. You know that the situation in Iran is better than most countries in the world, economically speaking. But Iranians don't feel that way, and it's to a large degree because there's a huge Persian language media apparatus that's based in the West, funded by
BBC
Western.
Persian, for example. Yeah.
BBC Persian is just one of many.
Yeah.
And they beam in day and night news, whether through Telegram channels or through, and they have cyber armies, the biggest being in Albania, where there are thousands of people who work day and night. Have each of them have many different accounts under different names in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter or X. So there's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week.
It's a barrage.
Media onslaught against Iran.
Yeah.
And American social media networks, they help them, as we saw after the demise of Mahsa Amini, how they would manipulate how the Iranians would be suppressed. So I've lost my Facebook account, I've lost my Instagram account, and my Twitter account, I'm pretty sure, is often shadow banned, if not always shadow banned. But anyway, the point is that people in Iran often feel that the situation here is worse than anywhere else. And those who visit Iran know that's not really the case, but that helps create apathy.
Yeah.
On the other hand, and I think a major reason was President Raisi's demise. President Raisi was a very respected president. He was a popular president. But after he passed away, his
he got
his
even more popular.
Went through the roof. He became very popular. And then immediately after that, we had emergency elections, sort of. We had immediate, I shouldn't call it emergency, but we had elections. And usually months before the elections, political parties start becoming more active. They start introducing people as their candidates. They start arguing with one another, their debates on campuses and here and there. And people become more acquainted with the potential candidates and ultimately the final candidates. This time that didn't happen. It was very sudden.
Yes.
In addition to that, none of the 6 candidates were nearly as charismatic, were not very charismatic, none of them. And they didn't see, I don't think the public really saw them filling the shoes of President Raisi. Especially, as I said, after his demise, he became very popular. So the incentive for voting was not very high for all these different reasons. But in the second round, fortunately, it went up 10%, whereas usually always in runoff elections in Iran, the number of voters go down. So I think it was a major success for Iran under these circumstances. And I think that the West recognizes that, but as usual, the Western media will try to depict the situation in Iran in a negative light. It doesn't matter what happens in Iran. It will always be negative. You will not see something positive about Iran in the Western media. And if you do, you should be very surprised.
Yeah, it's I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I find it funny how they kind of glorify the Labour results, even though they're quite abysmal in terms of vote share and also the actual number of votes. And then when it comes to Iran, you know, it's I think people don't understand that Iran has a very vibrant democratic process, and also a different way of doing things that, you know, Western people don't think of when they talk about democracy. They don't understand the way that it's done and the institutions that they have in Iran. I think that's also something that's often misconstrued, and it's not even addressed at all. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I think anyone who watched the debates, and I think the debates were broadcast in English on Press TV. I'm not quite sure, but I think that was the case. But if anyone watched the debates, they would see that they were very hard-hitting and that the differences between the candidates were substantial. In fact, probably the most insulting thing that I've ever seen on public television in Iran, and by the way, all the debates are on public television. Each candidate has had many hours of his own on the different public TV channels.
Wow. Yeah, we're not
And
used to
then
that in
public
England.
TV in Iran was mobilized for these debates, and not just for the debates, for each candidate. So all the for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it was just day and night. You couldn't escape it. It was one candidate on this channel, another candidate on another channel, and then their teams would debate each other, and then they had their own debates. So Iranian public TV, or as the West says, state TV, regime TV, or whatever they like to call it, because in the West they call it the BBC public television. It has a nicer name.
Yeah.
So Iranian public television mobilized for the candidates, so they had serious debates. But the most insulting thing that I've ever seen on Iranian public television was actually 3 years ago when President Raisi was a candidate. The head of the central bank of Dr. Rouhani, who was one of his opponents, was also a candidate, and another person close to Dr. Rouhani was a candidate too. And that person said on public television in the debate to Dr. Raisi that you are illiterate. He said that you've only gone to school for 6 years, meaning that you're an illiterate person. And the reason why he said that is that Dr. Raisi, when he was young, like many religious students of religion, after a certain year of school, they go to special schools.
Yes.
Where they also study religious studies, and at university they study religion. And he has it.
How can you be illiterate? That doesn't even make sense. Yeah.
Yes, he had a PhD, Dr. Raisi. But it was a very insulting statement to make, and it was an insult to anyone, any religious scholar, because the candidate on Iranian public television was saying you're all illiterate.
Yeah.
So you can, and this person is working, and he has his own business, and he's a politician. This is how Iran is, contrary to the claims made in the West, contrary to the claims made by Western media. Iranian public television has, I'm not saying it's a great, Iranian television is great, but at least during the presidential debates and during the voting season for the presidency, they're very open, they're very good, and they're very interesting. But this is not something that will ever be acknowledged by the BBC or CNN or Fox News or the Washington Post or the Guardian. And I think that will continue for the foreseeable future.
I mean, that alone, that they all have ample time to make their arguments is already more democratic than anything in the US and England. Professor, just about Pezeshkian himself, the president-elect, he served in the armed forces. He was also in parliament. He served as Iran's health minister. He's a heart surgeon, as a matter of fact. I must say, it's a rather impressive resume. What can you tell us about him, about his politics? Because we hear these terms thrown around: hardliner, traditionalists, conservatives, moderates, reformists, but they're never explained. Could you perhaps go through them for us, in addition to telling us about Pezeshkian?
Yes, Dr. Pezeshkian served as a volunteer in Saddam Hussein's Western-backed war on Iran, where the United States, the Europeans, the Soviet Union, and regional countries all supported Saddam Hussein, except for Syria. Syria supported Iran. And they stood against Saddam Hussein when the Americans and the Europeans were supporting him. And they gave him chemical weapons and everything. And he, like many others, was a volunteer in that war. You're correct. He's a 5-term member of parliament. He was just elected in the recent parliament when President Raisi passed away. And so he served 4 full terms in parliament. He began his 5th term, and now he'll leave parliament and, of course, become president shortly. He was also a minister of health. Before that, he was a deputy minister of health. And before that, he was the head of health in the province of East Azerbaijan, with the capital of Tabriz, his own hometown. So he has both experience as a lawmaker, but also as a government official. And of course, he's highly educated.
And these terms that we always hear thrown around, reformist, because they're calling him a reformist candidate. But you remember last election, we talked about this, you and me, how they keep throwing this term around, hardliner as well. I mean, I find these terms so funny because they're so ridiculous. They don't even mean anything. What is it? Could you just perhaps explain what they're talking about when they say these things, and what does Pezeshkian plan to reform if he's putting himself forward as a reformist candidate? Or I mean, he's already the president-elect.
It's not a very meaningful term because it's a very broad set of people. It's a huge umbrella with people who have very differing views. The previous president, Dr. Rouhani, was more affiliated with the reformist camp during the last decade, and Mr. Khatami was also a reformist. But based on my personal knowledge, I would say Dr. Pezeshkian is very different from Mr. Khatami or Dr. Rouhani. He is, I would say, a centrist reformist. It's just like Dr. He was a centrist principalist.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Dr. Jalili, for example, who made it to the second round against Dr. Pezeshkian, was a more radical principalist. So there's a big difference between someone like Dr. Raisi and Dr. Jalili. A significant difference. And there's a significant difference between someone like Dr. Pezeshkian and Rouhani or Khatami.
But Professor,
so I would actually say that Dr. Pezeshkian and Dr. Raisi have a lot in common. For example, Dr. Raisi has not said anything negative about Iran's policy of building relations with the global South. Iran joining BRICS, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. These are huge achievements by President Raisi, and they will be remembered in the decades to come. And I think that President Raisi, his impact on Iranian politics will be huge and long-lasting because he created this consensus where everyone now recognizes that looking globally instead of just to the West, as Rouhani's administration did to a large degree, is the right way forward. So, President Raisi, his connections with the global South actually helped Iran join BRICS. He went to Latin America, and there he built a friendship between Latin American leaders in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. And they lobbied the Brazilian president, who was ambivalent about Iran joining, and he supported Iran's bid subsequently. President Raisi built a good relationship with the Prime Minister of India, and the Prime Minister of India staunchly supported Iran's bid. So his travels across the world, his building of connections with global leaders helped Iran to join these organizations, build new relationships, and also to strengthen its ties with neighboring countries. Our relations with Turkmenistan have improved dramatically. Just recently, an agreement was signed between Iran and Turkmenistan for Turkmenistan's gas to come to be exported to Iran at a very low price. And Russian gas is also, there's an agreement between Iran and Russia for Russian gas to be exported through Iran. So Iran is going to be a hub for energy.
Yeah.
And the North-South corridor, which Dr. Raisi pursued and is being built as we speak, and Iran's role in the Belt and Road Initiative, huge changes are taking
Yes.
place which will make the Iran the center for many things. That has created a consensus among many. And Dr. Pezeshkian is not opposed to any of that. Dr. Raisi also, as you know, because I came to your hometown, well, where you live now. I don't think it's your hometown, but to Vienna, Dr. Raisi also negotiated with the P4+1 over the nuclear deal to revive the nuclear deal. And the shortcomings of the 2015 JCPOA, which became clear after it was signed, Obama constantly violated the deal and didn't pay any political price for doing so. And then Trump left the deal and the United States didn't pay a price for it. So it showed that our negotiations to bring about that deal were not adequate. So when President Raisi came to power, he sent his negotiator, Dr. Balkadi, to Vienna. There are long negotiations. I was there, as you know, for many weeks. I was also with Dr. Zarif in 2015 for his negotiations in Vienna. So Dr. Balkadi negotiated a deal which was much improved compared to the initial deal, where the nuclear deal would be protected. If the Americans violated the deal or the Europeans violated the deal, it would come at a cost to them.
Yes.
But ultimately, after everything was ready, and Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, said Iran's demands are reasonable and we hope that the Americans will accept so we can move on, the Americans didn't accept. And initially they delayed because of the midterm elections in the United States. Yeah. But then after that, the riots in Iran changed US calculations. Many of these Iranians were hostile to Iran, both inside Iran and in the West. They convinced the United States not to go ahead with the deal. But the point is that Dr. Raisi was pursuing a deal with the West to ease tensions. Dr. Pezeshkian has been saying the same thing during the debates. He's saying if we can sort out the negotiations over the JCPOA, I'm going to push for that. But he also qualified that statement. He said, if the Americans are unwilling to make the right choices, then we have other options. So that is basically what Dr. Raisi has been saying. And in other words, what Dr. Pezeshkian has been saying officially in his public statements are the same. You can interpret them to be the same as what Dr. Raisi
Professor,
said.
you said that when it comes to Jalili, who's running against him, that he was actually against the second round of negotiations under Dr. Bahari. Did I understand that correctly? Because you're sort of alluding to the fact that Pezeshkian is in line with Raisi's policy towards having a good JCPOA. Did I understand correctly that his opponent was against that? Because
yes, you're alluding to a tweet that I made. I posted today.
Yes,
and apparently in Iran it has been translated and it's caused a bit of a stir. The point that I'm making is that so far, based on Dr. Pezeshkian's statements, his position is no different from that of Dr. Raisi.
Yes.
But Dr. Jalili is actually different from Dr. Raisi in this regard, because he was not happy with Dr. Bagheri's negotiations in Vienna, which I was involved with. So Dr. Bagheri came to an agreement, an improved deal, much improved over what Dr. Zarif did in 2015. We had reached an agreement, and then the Americans balked, or the Americans backed off.
Yeah.
Right? Dr. Jalili was opposed to this. Why am I saying this? What I'm saying is that we don't have a principlist camp that is a monolith. We don't have a reformist camp that is a monolith. The principlist or conservative camp, whatever you'd like to call it, is very diverse. So in many ways, the center, those who are in the center, whether principalists or reformists, they often have much more similarity with each other than they do with people, let's say, other people in their own camp, in their so-called camp. So I
It's
don't
very
really,
interesting.
yeah, I don't really, that's why I don't take the term principalist or conservative or reformist very seriously.
Right.
One of the other candidates, Dr. Ghalibaf, the current Speaker of Parliament, he is considered to be a principalist or a conservative, but he's not at all similar to Dr. Jalili. And I think he too would be more similar with Dr. Pezeshkian. Of course, I'm sure that some of your viewers in Iran who are watching this may not be happy from that I'm saying this, but it's a fact. The views of these people are diverse, and there are no two political parties in Iran. And Dr. Pezeshkian is a person who is close to the leader. And I am optimistic about that he will continue pursuing building ties, stronger ties with the global South. And he will continue to support the axis of resistance, the resistance axis, and the resistance, the broader resistance, and the Palestinian people. That is, I think, something that there's a consensus on in Iran, except for maybe the most radical reformists. But as I said,
It's a diverse camp.
It's a very diverse camp, just like the so-called principalists. When someone says I'm a principalist or I'm a reformist, it doesn't mean anything to me at least. And I never considered myself really to be in either of these two camps, although I have close friends who are considered to be in both camps. Two or three of my closest colleagues at the University of Tehran, one of them is an influential reformist and very pro-Palestine, very pro-axis of resistance. I went with him to Lebanon and Syria a few times. And another close friend of mine at the University of Tehran, he would be considered to be one of those moderate principalists. So these labels that the West uses don't make much sense, and they use it for a specific reason. They want to say the reformists are pro-Western and the principalists or the conservatives are that's not really the case. And as I said, none of the candidates represented Dr. Raisi. None of them. Dr. Raisi was in a class of his own. And as I said, none of the candidates said that as I said, in the case of Dr. Jalili, his views on the nuclear deal were different from Dr. Raisi's. Dr. Ghalibaf, his views were different from that of Dr. Jalili. So so I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I'm very happy
to clarify what goes on in Iran.
No, on the contrary, I'm very happy. This is precisely what I wanted to have you clarify, because we never ever hear any kind of nuance, and it's maddening. Who can we expect in Pezeshkian's cabinet? Any guesses? Do you think Zarif will resume his role as foreign minister?
I doubt that. I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't think Dr. Pezeshkian would want him as his foreign minister. Dr. Zarif did not win the election for him, contrary to what some in the West like to think. Dr. Pezeshkian made his case, and I think the debates were key, both in the first round, but also in the second round when there were only two of them and they had more time to talk. I think he made his case, and people supported him. He didn't win by a landslide or anything like that, but he had a strong majority. No one can claim that they won the election for him. You do see some people right now acting as if they are the president or they played a key role, but he is the president and he doesn't owe anyone anything. With regards to Dr. Zarif, I doubt he'll be the foreign minister for a host of different reasons. One is that the parliament the current parliament that has just been voted in, I don't think they have excellent relations with him, but I don't think Dr. Pezeshkian, and I'm just speculating.
Yes,
I
of
don't
course.
think he will
I'm
be the
asking you
foreign
to.
minister. Yeah, I don't think he'll be the foreign minister, and I don't know who he'll choose in his cabinet or as his first vice president. But I think Dr. Zarif will probably have some role in the government, maybe let's say a foreign policy advisor or something like that. But maybe he will be put forward as the minister. But I've been told by a couple of people in the Pezeshkian camp that that's not necessarily the case.
What of Dr. Ali Bagheri? You recall I interviewed him in Vienna during the nuclear talks. He was sent to lead those talks despite being deputy foreign minister, which kind of says a lot, because if you send a deputy, that means they're very qualified. Because the time before that, it was the foreign minister Zarif doing it. I mean, will we see him have some role in this new government, because he's the acting foreign minister now, and he did a very good job during the last talks. So will he have any role in this government, do you think?
Again, I don't know, but I doubt it. I think that if Dr. Jalili had been voted as president, he would probably have changed the foreign minister, because, as I said, Dr. Jalili's views on the nuclear deal are different, very different from Dr. Bagheri's and Dr. Raisi's. So if Dr. Jalili had been voted in, I think Dr. Bagheri would have been removed. And I think probably under Dr. Pezeshkian, Dr. Bagheri will also not be the foreign minister. He is a diplomat, but he won't continue in his current position. I'm pretty sure. I don't have any insider information, and I think it's
Are
going
you
to take
holding out on me,
time.
Professor?
Sorry?
Are you holding out on me? Spill the beans.
No, it's, first of all, it's very early on. Dr. Pezeshkian is going to have a lot of work to do to choose a cabinet, because he's not prepared. This was a sudden election.
Yeah.
This isn't, as I said, this is not a normal election. In normal elections, they would be preparing the grounds for like 6, 7, 8 months. And the candidates, and that's why the turnout would have been much higher. Usually before elections on campuses, the different political parties go and have debates and discussions, and in the provinces and in different in the public sphere, and it would gradually build up, and then by the time you have the campaigns, which would have been longer because there was more time, then by then people would have been more prepared. But this was very sudden. None of the candidates were contemplating standing for presidency. It's been less than 2 months. So he's going to now until now they were just campaigning. So he's going to now begin starting negotiations with the Speaker of Parliament, parliamentarian groups, because the Parliament has different factions, different groups. He'll have to speak with them, and negotiate with them with regards to different candidates for different ministries. And so it's going to be a process. It's going to take time. He will probably become president, and then for a short period of time, the previous cabinet will continue to work with him until his team is approved by Parliament. And then the new government will begin as, as the Pezeshkian government.
If I could ask you about foreign policy, how much do you think foreign policy will change? Because Pezeshkian, although I think this was a bit misinterpreted or mistranslated in the West, when he said he wants to work with the West, I think they're hoping, at least in Western governments, that this means cooling down the resistance. What would you make of that? Is that likely? I mean, you know my opinion, but I'm here to interview you, so I want you to give us your view on what the foreign policy is going to look like. Will it change much under Pezeshkian, or will it continue to support all of the resistance factions across the Middle East that are now especially fighting against Israel and occupied?
There are two things here. One is that even under Dr. Rouhani, who was affiliated to the reformists and who was not as centrist as Pezeshkian, Iran supported the resistance axis across the region. Pezeshkian is more centrist, so he is definitely going to pursue the same policy. But what President Pezeshkian does is he provides the West with an opportunity, because the West can right now say, well, someone new has come to power, he wants to do a deal with us, so let's cut a deal. Fine. If they're going to change policy and make the right decisions by claiming that the other side has changed, we don't care. They can do that. And then there can be progress. But it all depends on the West. He has said, especially in the very last debate, that if the United States and the West don't make the right decisions, we have other options. And that's exactly what Dr. Raisi has always been saying as well. So he is stepping forward and saying to the West, look, do you want to change the dynamics? We're ready. And I think that provides the West with that opportunity. But does that mean Iran is going to back off, stop supporting the Palestinians? Of course not. Does that mean Iran is going to stop supporting Hezbollah and the resistance in Lebanon or in Yemen? Absolutely not. They will continue to do so because this is a long-term policy that all governments over the years have supported, and the judiciary, the judiciary is less involved, but let's say the parliament and the cabinet, the government now, and in the last previous parliament and the parliament before that, and previous administrations have all supported the resistance and the Palestinian people, and today they will continue to do so. So there will be no change in policy with regards to this principled position, but he is providing an opportunity for the West to decrease their own problems with Iran and with the region. And if they are sane, if they are reasonable, if they put aside their arrogance, things can be done. Am I optimistic? You know, when during the negotiations in Vienna, we had reached an agreement.
Yes. The
After
draft was
many
ready.
weeks of tough negotiations, Iran made some compromises. The West made a lot more compromises. The 2015 deal was a protection, or let's say it was much better protected under the New Deal, and the Europeans were satisfied. It was only, as I said earlier, it was for the Americans to make the final decision. And Joseph Borrell, when he said, "Well, we're waiting for the Americans to make a decision so we can move on," he's close to the Americans. So therefore, the Iranian side thought it was over. And I think you recall, I was prepared to come back to Vienna for the ceremony. And I told you that, you spoke with me and you were hoping that you could maybe be a part in that ceremony or do interviews. And I said, yes, we're probably coming within the next couple of days. And then it was delayed. And then when the riots happened.
And the Ukraine war as well.
Yes. And those people who provoked the riots, and some of them are people inside Iran, some journalists and others who were, because of their animosity towards the Raisi administration and for other reasons, who were provoking the rioters, and those Iranians abroad that are funded by the West, and they're in the Persian media, and they were provoking the riots and giving misinformation and disinformation. Many of them, those people outside Iran, were telling the Americans, don't do a deal with the Iranians. It's the regime, as they like to call it, it's going to collapse. And so the Americans refused. So these people were seeking to preserve the sanctions. And some of those people in Iran, knowingly or wittingly or unwittingly, they were also a reason for the sanctions to remain in place and for the deal not to go through. So the point is that we're almost there. if the Americans and the Europeans want, of course, the circumstances have changed now. Iran is even stronger now than it was 2, 3 years ago. And the West is in much more trouble than it was 2, 3 years ago. If you recall, in Vienna, I was encouraging Western diplomats and Western elites and those who were speaking with me to do a deal with Iran after the Ukraine war. Especially, I was saying that you have cut off your trade with Russia, you've cut off your energy uh, business with the Russians, the gas and oil from Russia is no longer coming in like before, and you have winter approaching. It's time to do a deal. And they were flexible, and as I said, they reached that deal. But they couldn't, the Americans, as I said, they ultimately they backed off. But now the situation is getting worse. That winter has just been continuing and getting worse. The situation in Europe today, as you know, is much worse, and it is going to get even worse in the future. If the Americans and the Europeans had cut a deal, they could have invested in Iranian oil and gas, and they could have reaped the benefits. They lost that opportunity. And now, because of the tight market and because Iran has been able to circumvent the Western sanctions and because of Dr. Raisi's foreign policy, Iran is exporting all of its oil at market price. And Iran's extra gas, it's being exported to Iraq and Turkey as well. So the West has lost out, and things as they get worse in the coming months, and again, winter is approaching shortly, and the situation with Russia is definitely going to get worse. They need a deal with Iran to decrease their tensions and to decrease their problems. And Dr. Pezeshkian is providing them with that opportunity.
Professor, I'll come back to the nuclear deal in a second. I just wanted to ask you about support for the resistance, because you say it will continue, and I agree with you. I'm wondering, by how much will the support continue? For example, when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon, can they expect to see unconditional support all the time? For example, will there be any caps on how much they can wreak havoc on the Israelis? Because what they've been doing in the north, as you know.
Nothing will change. Nothing will change. Iran will support the resistance. It is a moral obligation, but it is also it's in Iran's strategic interest. Israel is a menace to the region, and it's a menace for Iran. We cannot have a normal situation in this region. We cannot have normal growth. We cannot have this part of the world cannot be normal as long as we have this barbaric medieval regime that's ethno-supremacist, that is openly racist, that the West supports. The West supports ethno-supremacism and racial hierarchy. They openly support it. This is not acceptable, and it's not morally acceptable for Iran. It's not strategically acceptable for Iran or Iran's allies. So there is absolutely no way that Iran is going to change its policy. And Dr. Pezeshkian will continue. Remember, Dr. Pezeshkian, as I said, served as a volunteer.
Yes.
In Saddam Hussein's war against Iran. He's a person
He's a veteran, yeah.
Is, by nature, resistance. I posted a picture of him during the war in one of my tweets, in one of my X posts. I don't know what to call it. And I think it's wishful thinking on behalf of the West, and I think it's slander against Dr. Pezeshkian if anyone says otherwise without providing any evidence. So Iran will continue to expand ties with Russia, with China, with India, with Central Asia, with the Persian Gulf region, with Africa, and so on. And we have had, and Dr. Raisi has had huge successes on that front, and it will have a huge impact on the future of Iran. He will continue to expand on that, but he is also giving the West an opportunity to change the relationship. And if they're smart and they put aside their arrogance, it's possible. As I said, 2 years ago, we almost got there.
Yeah. Yeah, here's the photo that you're talking about of the Iranian president-elect, Pezeshkian, in the 1980 to 1988 war with Iraq, the Western-backed attack, which you also served in, by the way, Professor. You're also a veteran. I forget to mention that in the introduction because your resume is so long. But you also survived some of those vicious attacks, and I think I'll just remind the audience that those weapons were provided by who? Who gave these chemical weapons to the Iraqis?
Yes, I was shot once, and I also have shrapnel wounds, but I survived two chemical attacks. One was a nerve agent during the Khaybar operations in 1982 and 1983. The Iranian calendar is different from the Western calendar. And also during the last weeks of the war, I was injured with mustard gas.
Wow. I mean, it's very heartbreaking to see two neighboring countries doing that. But we, the West.
Well,
always
they're not two
that.
neighboring countries. The West installed, they kept Saddam Hussein in power, and they supported him. He was their man in Baghdad, and only after the invasion of Kuwait did they turn against him. And if you recall, the U.S. ambassador in Baghdad, she sort of gave a green light for Iraq to invade Kuwait when she met Saddam Hussein. This is something that many people don't remember. And but after the United States and its allies defeated Saddam in Kuwait, Iraqis revolted, and they were about to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And then the United States allowed the Iraqis to use their helicopters and to bomb these people and to crush the rebellion against Saddam Hussein. So the Americans wanted to keep Saddam Hussein in power after they defeated him in Kuwait. They sanctioned the country. They brutalized the countries through their barbaric sanctions, but they helped keep him in power because the Americans and the Europeans did not want Iraqis to be free. They did not want the real representatives of Iraq to come to power. Why? We see the reason why today. Because the Iraqi government supports the resistance. They support Gaza. They support Hamas. They support Islamic Jihad. They support the Palestinian people. And that is something that they did not want, because right now Iraq is playing a crucial role. The resistance in Iraq is playing a crucial role, both when they're striking against the Israeli regime, but also their presence makes it very dangerous for the Americans to get directly involved in the fighting. Because if the Americans join the Israelis, for example, in a war in Lebanon, the American assets in Iraq, everything will be gone. Their embassy will be gone. All the bases, everything will be gone from north to south. All their economic assets, everything will be gone. So the Americans know that and if they lose Iraq, they'll also lose their foothold in Syria. So the Americans know, that the Iraqi people are a part of the resistance. They're, the majority of them, and they didn't want the ordinary Iraqis to be empowered. So they kept Saddam Hussein in power, even after they defeated him.
I mean,
in 1990, 1991.
I'll just add one counter argument. To his credit, he was the only Arab leader at the time who fired Scud missiles at the Israelis, which a lot of Arab leaders
but that was only because he wanted to when the war was starting, he wanted to create chaos in the region. Otherwise, he was the greatest. Saddam Hussein did the greatest service to the Israeli regime.
It's like the mafia. They used him and they killed him. They killed him like a loose end.
Killing Iranians who were, the heart of the resistance against apartheid, the whole revolution. One of the key foreign policy theme was opposition to apartheid South Africa and apartheid in Israel. He fought against Iran. He slaughtered people. He used illegal weapons with Western help. Then he invaded his neighbor, Kuwait, which had been helping him in his invasion of Iran, and he did no service to the Iraqi people nor to the people of Palestine. And if he had never, if instead of invading Iran and invading Kuwait, he had, changed policy and cooperated with Iran, we probably wouldn't have an Israel today.
He should have gone west towards Palestine. That's really well. Yeah, that's the only thing to do. But I remember Syria was also on Iran's side back then in that war.
Absolutely. Syria, when the West was providing chemical weapons, when the Saudis and the Kuwaitis were helping Saddam Hussein carry out his aggression, perhaps the only country in the world that was totally on Iran's side was Syria. And Iraq was exporting oil through Syria, and the Syrians stopped that oil. So they paid a price for supporting Iran, and the Iranians recognized that they were indebted, and when, of course, the U.S. and regional countries were supporting Al Qaeda and ISIS and other extremist groups and building them up in Syria, Iran returned the favor and went to the aid of the Syrian people alongside Hezbollah, alongside the Afghan volunteers, and alongside Iraqi volunteers. And then later on, the Russians, they helped defeat these extremists. But it was first Syria that came to the aid of Iran when Saddam invaded the country.
Well, I hope that brotherly cooperation continues. And Professor, if I could go back to the nuclear deal, does this mean, can we conclude from Pezeshkian's election that the negotiations will begin soon? I'm kind of just asking because I want to see you in Vienna. But yeah.
Well, I have no idea. The priority, there are many priorities right now in Iran. I don't think the leader wants, and I don't think Dr. Pezeshkian wants to go back to the policies of Dr. Rouhani, where all the focus was placed on the nuclear deal. The country has other things to do. So I think the nuclear deal will have a special file, just as under Dr. Raisi, the negotiations can be pursued, and we can see if the Americans are going to take a sane and rational position. But at the same time, Iran's policy of building its capabilities and building up its relations with the rest of the world will continue. So I don't think that we're going to go back to the Rouhani era. I think that in many ways we're going to have continuity, and Dr. Pezeshkian is not a naive person. We've seen how the Americans cheat and lie and how they violate agreements. We've seen that not just with Iran, we saw it with the Minsk Accords, how the Europeans and the Americans violate deals that were supported by the UN Security Council, and then later on they admitted that they never had the intention to abide by their commitments, whether it was Iran or whether it was with Ukraine. So Iranians are much more aware of reality, and therefore any negotiations that take place with the West will be carried out with great care to make sure they cannot cheat us again. But again, Dr. Pezeshkian is providing Europe and the United States with an opportunity to do the right thing. It's up to them. But again, this is not this. There are many other things that need to be done, and I'm sure he's going to be pursuing all of them.
Professor, I'd like to ask you one last question, which is not related to the elections, but it's sort of a breaking story, and I saw you posting about it on Twitter, as I did, and it's a report in this Israeli paper in Haaretz about how the Israelis fired on their own people on October 7, that the order was nothing goes back to Gaza, destroy all the vehicles. I mean, this Hannibal Directive is nothing new to you or me, but I still wanted to get your reaction to this story. And I feel like there's a pattern here with, weapons of mass destruction. It's like they always give the truth months or years later when it doesn't matter anymore. And after they've already killed, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of Arabs and Muslims. What's your reaction to the story?
Well, actually, when I was with Piers Morgan, during the first time when I was on his show, not
You
the second
schooled
time.
him.
The first time, I was about to allude to the Hannibal Directive when he cut me off, when he asked me about the number of Israelis who died on October the 7th. And I was busy saying that some of them were killed by the Israelis, and then I was going to speak about the Hannibal Directive, and then he cut me off, and we moved on to something else. But it shows how barbaric this regime is, and how inhumane it is, that it has complete disregard for its own people and its own soldiers. The Hannibal Directive is basically that means that we will kill our own people so that they won't be taken captive. I've never heard of any country. Of course, the Israeli regime is no country. It's the only real regime in the world. Yeah. It has no legitimacy, and it is going to die. It is dying as we speak. It will never go back to normal. It's finished. It may take a few years, but there will be no Israel, in the future. I'm not saying it will end tomorrow, and the longer this war lasts, and the more that it expands, the shorter the life of the regime will be. But I've never heard, when we, for example, during the Iran-Iraq war, we tried our best to capture Iraqi soldiers and not kill them. We sacrificed some of our own. I was witness to this on one occasion when one of my friends died trying to convince a group of Iraqi soldiers to surrender, Saddam Hussein soldiers to surrender. So we would sacrifice it because we were told that, most of these people, they're just forced to fight. I was witness to that. And then to see that a regime like the Israeli regime's policy, and this is not a new policy, this policy was carried out during the previous genocidal attacks on Gaza as well. Yeah. The Israeli regime, not only does it not protect prisoners, and we know how they're raping prisoners, and there are reports of prisoners being raped or sexually assaulted in the prisons. And we know how they're dying under torture. Physicians have died under torture. We know what the Israelis are doing, but they even do not have any respect for their own people. They don't have any, and we know that they're targeting their. By the way, we know that they're also targeting their. Right now, when they bomb Gaza, they're targeting their own people. If they find their people, they bomb those areas. So they want to get rid of all their prisoners in Gaza so that Hamas will have no cards to play with, to have in a hostage exchange, because the Israelis have many thousands of hostages, and they want to kill all of their own prisoners. That's what basically the Hannibal Directive is. And that's also what they did on October the 7th. They killed many of their own people who were being taken back to Gaza so that Hamas and the resistance won't have these people, so that for a hostage exchange. Who does that? Who does such a... And of course, the West has been covering this up for months, even though we know this policy exists, but now it's out in the open. But you're not going to see the West say much about it.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to mention it at all. It's funny in some regards. Sometimes the Israeli press is more open than the Western one, which is such a...
Exactly. But imagine killing your own people who are faithful to your own, it's like in the case of the Israelis, it's like the Confederate Army in the United States, who want, the slave owners, killing their own soldiers who were captured by,
I've never heard of it.
By Grant's forces and so on.
Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing, and when it comes to Americans, they try everything to it's part of it is supremacy. It's like, oh well,
I've never heard that the Nazis kill their own soldiers. I've never heard of them. It's something unique to this barbaric regime.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by it, and just because it's shocking doesn't mean it's not true. It's very, very well documented. It's they talk about it. Israeli military officials have talked about it, and as you correctly point out, I've never heard of this in any conflict before. I'm sure it's happened before, but it's not as a matter of policy, of military doctrine inside an armed forces or otherwise. Really despicable, really despicable. I think it's like their hatred for Arabs and Muslims is so strong they would rather murder their own people to avoid giving any concessions. That's my takeaway from it. I don't know if
They're
you
truly
agree.
evil. When you are racist, and when you call people Amalek, and when their leaders call for the
Yeah.
wiping out of women and children, these kids right now who are starving in Gaza, remember, they're just a kilometer or two away from medicine and food.
Yes.
They're not in the middle of some big country or trapped. It's a dot on the map, and the Europeans and the Americans and the Israelis are all conspiring together to starve these people, to give the Israeli regime leverage. Remember, as soon as the South Africans took their complaint, and we had the ICJ make its statement, immediately the Israelis and the West, through the Israelis made a claim against the UN, and the West stopped their funding for the Palestinian people. They wanted to starve the Palestinians as revenge, and to give the Israeli regime a leverage to force the resistance to submit. And so right now, these Palestinians who are dying, these children who are starving in Gaza City, in northern Gaza, and in other areas, they are very close to food. They are very close to medicine. But the Israelis are blocking it. The West is helping. They're also a part of this conspiracy against the Palestinian people, and the West will not say anything even about this barbaric policy of the Israeli regime to kill its own people who are arrested or captured by the resistance.
You call them barbaric. I hope that in colloquial use we start saying Israeli instead of barbaric and Nazi, because it really is the same, if not much
Yes,
worse.
they're the same. Even as I said, the Nazis, ISIS. I never heard ISIS have a Hannibal Directive. I never heard of the Nazis having a Hannibal Directive. I never heard of Al Qaeda having a Hannibal Directive. I never heard of the Contra rebels in Latin America having a Hannibal Directive. So it's something unique to this backward and nasty regime.
It is. And again, Professor, I'm very grateful for your time. If I could just plug your Twitter and advise everyone to go and follow you. This is Professor Marandi's Twitter or X account. I'm posting the link in the chat. Please make sure to follow him. He has an absolutely smashing Twitter account. Really an absolute must follow for anything.
That young 16-year-old in the front, that's me.
Right there.
I'm a bit older now.
No, it's we're all young in spirit and in body and mind, and please, I really do encourage people to follow you. And if you want to see some more interviews I've done with Professor Marandi about the previous Iranian election and also the Iran nuclear deal, you can find this playlist on the exact same YouTube channel right here. I'm posting the link in the chat. And the professor was talking about children in Gaza. There's a charity I've posted in the comments section for disabled children in Gaza. They're very close to hitting the goal, so please make sure you go and donate on GoFundMe. And there are 2 other Palestinian charities also. Professor, thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful to have had you on.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, and I hope we get to see each other very soon, wherever it is.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Take care. Ma salama. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye for now.
That was Professor Marandi, everybody. And again, his Twitter account is right here on the screen and in the chat. And I thought before we go anywhere, I could show you, we can look at this article that's just been published by Haaretz. about the Hannibal Directive because it's causing a lot of noise right now. So if you just give me a second to get it out. And of course, we can just keep talking about some of the resistance developments. All right, I'm just going to get this article out. Give me a second over here. It's I think it's also behind a paywall, so I'll have to try and circumvent that. Give me a second. Okay, let's see if we can get this to work. Okay, splendid. So we've got it up. You guys should be able to see that on the screen right now. So okay. By the way, before I continue, please let me know in the comments where you guys are tuning in from, where you're watching, and please hit the like button if you haven't already. We've got 2,000 people watching on YouTube, but we only have 1,000 likes. So there's about half of you who haven't hit the like button, so please make sure you do. Let's look at this article then, shall we? So this has just been published by Haaretz, by the Israeli paper, and it confirms what we've been saying all along, that the Israelis killed their own people on October 7th, and this was done using the Hannibal Directive. And let's look at the article. It's called IDF ordered Hannibal Directive on October 7 to prevent Hamas taking soldiers captive. Okay, so Gaza division operations and airstrikes in the first hours of October 7 were based on limited information. The first long moments after the Hamas attack was launched were chaotic. Reports were coming in with their significance not always clear. When their meaning was understood, it was realized that something horrific had taken place. Communication networks couldn't keep up with the flow of information, as was the case for soldiers sending these reports. However, the message conveyed at 11:22 a.m. across the Gaza division network was understood by everyone. Not a single vehicle can return to Gaza. Okay, so those are the exact words. Not a single vehicle can return to Gaza. Now, I'll interrupt reading this to perhaps show you some of the footage from a helicopter. This is, give me a second to pull it up. It's from a, so yeah, here's one thing from October 7. You can see where they're destroying all the tanks. The homes are being destroyed by the tanks. So you have Israeli tanks firing at their own settlers, okay? And there's also footage of, so I think it was recorded by a drone, which I showed to you before, and you can see how they're destroying all the vehicles and all the people that are running away from the festival or being taken back into Gaza. Okay, so here it is. You see this clip? So you see that car right there with people running away. They just completely destroyed it. No consideration for who's in there, who that is. Just destroy and kill everything and everyone. Okay, so let's continue with the article. At this point, the IDF was not aware of the extent of kidnapping along the Gaza border, but it did know that many people were involved. Thus, it was entirely clear that what the message meant and what the fate of some of the kidnapped people would be. All right, so there's no misunderstanding here. They didn't think like, oh, these are purely Palestinians. And by the way, even then, like, let's say there were no Israelis on the ground. Why are you just shooting at people who are clearly civilians? You can see they're civilians. And if you can't distinguish, then you shouldn't be firing, should you? If you can't distinguish, because then you're also basically killing civilians de facto. So this was not the first order given by the division with the intent of foiling a kidnapping, even at the expense of the lives of the kidnapped, a procedure known in the army as the Hannibal procedure. Documents obtained by Haaretz, as well as testimonies of soldiers, mid-level and senior IDF officers, reveal a host of orders and procedures laid down by the Gaza Division, Southern Command, and the IDF General Staff up to the afternoon hours of that day, showing how widespread this procedure was from the first hours following the attack and at various points along the border. Haaretz does not know whether or how many civilians and soldiers were hit due to these procedures, but the cumulative data indicates that many of the kidnapped people were at risk, exposed to Israeli gunfire, even if they weren't the target. I mean, I don't know how they can say even if they weren't the target. If you're saying it's Hannibal Directive, then obviously the Israelis are the target. That's what the Hannibal Directive was. Okay. At 6:43 a.m., at which time rocket barrages were launched at Israel and thousands of Hamas operatives were attacking army strongholds, and the division's observation and communications capabilities, the division's commander, Brigadier General Avi Rosenfeld, a very Middle Eastern name, Rosenfeld, right? Declared that the Philistines have invaded. Really? It sounds like the Europeans have invaded, Mr. Rosenfeld. In any case, this is the procedure when an enemy invades Israeli territory, upon which a division commander can assume extraordinary authority, including the employment of heavy fire inside Israeli territory in order to block an enemy raid. A very senior IDF source confirmed to Haaretz that the Hannibal procedure was employed on October 7, adding that this was not used by the divisional commander. Well, who gave the order then? This, said the source, will perhaps be established by post-war investigations. In any case, says a defense official who, sorry if I can just interrupt myself. They say post-war investigations. Well, you can't have post-war investigations if the war never ends, right? That's Netanyahu's logic. In any case, says a defense official who is familiar with the October 7 operations at the Gaza Division, in the morning hours, no one knew what was going on outside. He says that Rosenfeld was in the war room, not emerging, while outside a world war was raging. Everyone was shocked by the number of terrorists who had penetrated the base. Even in our nightmares, we didn't have plans for such an attack. No one had a clue about the number of people kidnapped or where army forces were. There was crazy hysteria with decisions made without any verified information. Pay attention how he says penetrated the base. The base, not the houses. Which again, even in the houses, if you have weapons in the houses, which Israeli settlers do, and Israelis all have to join the army, so they're trained professional killers who stay in the army as reservists till they're 40. But they're attacking military bases. Terrorists don't attack military bases per se. They usually attack civilians. Not always, but that's not the only criteria. But it's just so ridiculous how they can't grasp the concept that, you know, we put a base on their land and now they're attacking the base because they don't want us on their land. But okay. Just continuing here, one of these decisions was made at 7:18 a.m. when an observation post at the Yifta outpost reported that someone had been kidnapped at the Erez border crossing adjacent to the IDF's liaison office. Okay? So border crossing. What is a border crossing? It's a military checkpoint. Again, military targets. And it's just adjacent to the IDF's liaison office. So basically part of it. Okay? Do you notice how these Israeli soldiers themselves are not only saying they fired on their own people, but that Hamas attacked military targets? Okay? And they kidnapped soldiers from those military targets. Hannibal at Erez came the command from divisional headquarters. Hannibal at Erez. Okay? Dispatch a Zik. The Zik is an unmanned assault drone, and the meaning of this command was clear. So this looks like the second one. Okay? This is the second command that day referring to Hannibal, and it's not at 11 a.m., it's at 7 a.m. already. So it's very clear what's going on. Hamas are attacking the military outposts. Soldiers are being kidnapped. Okay, just kill the soldiers. This wasn't the last time that such an order was heard over the communications network. Over the next half hour, the division realized that Hamas terrorists had managed to kill and abduct soldiers serving at the crossing and at the adjacent base. This is the third time in the article they mentioned that Hamas attacked military targets. Just pay attention to that. I know it's not the point of the article, but I'm making it a point. Then at 7:41 a.m., it happened again. Hannibal at Erez, an assault on the crossing and the base, just so that no more soldiers be taken. Such commands were given later as well. The Erez border crossing was not the only place this happened. Information obtained by Haaretz and confirmed by the army shows that throughout the morning, the Hannibal procedure was employed at two other locations penetrated. The Reim army base, where the divisional headquarters were located, and the Nahal Oz outpost, in which female spotters were based. This did not prevent the kidnapping of 7 of them or the killing of 15 other spotters, as well as 38 other soldiers. Interesting. So all of these targets, I've lost count. What is it? 4, 5, 6 military targets. This shows you that Hamas went after legitimate military targets, that their intelligence was very good. They knew exactly which crossing to go to, which outposts and divisional headquarters to target, and what to do when they get there. Again, even the Israelis would agree it's absolutely immaculate planning and execution for a military operation. It's immaculate. Nothing like this ever done before. On this scale, nothing. Over the next few hours, division headquarters started putting the pieces of the puzzle together, realizing the extent of the Hamas attack, but missing the invasion of Kibbutz near Oz, which the First Army forces reached only after the terrorists had left. Regarding the frequency of employing the Hannibal procedure, it seemed that nothing changed. Thus, for example, at 10:19 a.m., a report reached divisional headquarters indicating that a Zik, again, that's a drone, a killer drone, not a surveillance drone, had attacked the Reim base. 3 minutes later, another such report arrived. At that time, Shaldag commando forces were already on the base fighting the terrorists. To this day, it's not clear whether one of them was hurt in the drone attack. That means yes. What is known is that over the communications network, there was a message asking everyone to make sure no soldier was outdoors on the base, since IDF forces were about to enter and drive out or kill remaining terrorists. I mean, just look at that photo. Just look at that photo. Okay? There are piles, literally piles of cars, burnt, completely burnt out, that the Israelis crushed. What that means is that those were destroyed by the Israelis, because if you're burning entire, I mean, we're not talking about one vehicle. Of course, anyone can burn one vehicle. I'm talking about dozens and dozens of cars. Completely burnt out. Obviously, destroyed by missiles from helicopters, which were dispatched that day, which did fire on the Israelis, or by drones, which also happened, or by tanks, okay? Hamas did not have helicopters. They don't have tanks. And they didn't bring, as far as I know, they didn't bring rocket-propelled grenades in that quantity. I'm sure they had some, but not to that quantity, not to the point that they could pull off something like that. So my point here is that the Israelis literally destroyed dozens and dozens of vehicles indiscriminately, and then crushed all of the cars so that there's no forensic evidence left to actually investigate and find out, because you can collect, you can do chemical analysis and find the exact ammunition that was used and prove who did it. But we can deduce just from the photos and images of that this was not Hamas, because Hamas didn't have that firepower on that day. Okay? Another important point I want to drive home, just because this photograph is making me think of that. All right? So I'll continue reading the article. It goes on to say the decision to conduct attacks inside outposts, says a senior defense official, will haunt senior commanders all their lives. Anyone making such a decision knew that our combatants in the area could be hit as well. But such attacks took place, it turns out, not only inside outposts or bases. At 10:32 a.m., a new order was issued, according to which all battalions in the area were ordered to fire mortars in the direction of the Gaza Strip. Internal discussions in the army noted this order, attributed to, again, Brigadier General Rosenfeld, what a Middle Eastern name, was heavily criticized, since at that time the IDF did not have a complete picture of all the forces in the area, including soldiers and civilians. Some of these were in open areas or in woods along the border, trying to hide from the Hamas terrorists.
At that point, the army did not know the number of people who had been kidnapped. We thought they numbered dozens at that stage. Firing mortars at the Gaza Strip would endanger them as well. Furthermore, another order given at 11:22 a.m., according to which no vehicle would be allowed to return to Gaza, took this step further. Okay? So, just to recap, all morning they're saying, dispatch a drone, use the Hannibal Directive, use the Hannibal Directive, destroy and kill everyone that you see. And then on top of that, at 11:22 a.m., they're saying no vehicles whatsoever. Like every single thing that is going to Gaza, blow it to hell. Okay? And they're doing this on both sides of the so-called border. So they're doing it inside Gaza with mortars. They're doing it inside and around the military headquarters and outposts and checkpoints and border crossings. And they're doing it just randomly at the music festival as well. And I'll just say one thing, because you saw the quote here. It says that we thought they numbered dozens at that stage. So this Israeli soldier is telling the newspaper that it's okay to kill a few dozen Israelis, right? To stop them being taken hostage. It's not like my life is in danger, so I'm killing the other Israelis. No, it's just like, I don't want them to be taken hostage. I'm going to murder them. So if it's a few dozen, it's okay for them. It's okay to kill their own people. Amazing, right? Amazing. That's called murder usually, but okay. In addition to that, they're making it sound like, oh my God, it was so chaotic. They didn't know what was going on. We thought it was just a few hostages. We didn't know it's so many. Okay, but you know now. Why are you still bombing Gaza and killing your own people? You killed at least 70 Israelis in Gaza since October. You know that they're in Gaza. That you claim you're bombing Gaza because of them, and yet you're killing them. You know they're there. You're killing them. I mean, it's unbelievable. So this nonsense. Oh my God, it was so chaotic. We didn't know it. Everyone knew by then that such vehicles could be carrying kidnapped civilians or soldiers. A source in Southern Command is the one that told that to Haaretz. Okay, so I mean, look how many different sources we have. It's ridiculous, right? This is a very well-written article. There's no doubt. There was no case in which a vehicle carrying kidnapped people was knowingly attacked, but you couldn't really know if there were any such people in a vehicle. I can't say there was a clear instruction, but everyone knew what it meant to not let any vehicles return to Gaza. Well, hold on. What is this? What is this quote? He's saying there's no case where we knew that civilians were in the vehicle and we fired on them, but you couldn't know that there were civilians in there, so we fired anyway. Okay, so you killed civilians. I mean, it's like you gambled. You basically gambled, knowing that there could be civilians. So you did know that there could be civilians in there. This is like such fucking lawyer talk, you know? I wonder if it's a military lawyer that they're interviewing. This is how a lawyer speaks, all right? Again, I'm going to read this to you again. It's so ridiculous. There was no case in which a vehicle carrying kidnapped people was knowingly attacked, but you couldn't really know if there were any such people in a vehicle. I can't say there was a clear instruction, but everyone knew what it meant to not let any vehicles return to Gaza. Yes, there was a clear instruction. You've literally told us that they said use the Hannibal Directive. That's a clear instruction. And I mean, it's like this person is saying something and answering themselves in both sentences, right? I can't say there was a clear instruction, but everyone knew what it was to not let any vehicles back into Gaza. Okay, fine. A new development occurred at 2 p.m. All the forces were instructed not to exit border communities toward the west in the direction of the border, with an emphasis on not chasing terrorists. At that point, the border area was under intense fire directed at anyone in that area, making it a danger zone. Okay, so well into the afternoon, they're still shelling everyone and everything. The instruction, says the source in Southern Command, was meant to turn the area around the border fence into a killing zone, closing it off toward the west. At 6:40 p.m., military intelligence believed that many terrorists were intending to flee together back to the Gaza Strip in an organized manner. This was near Kibbutz Be'eri, Kfar Aza. I mean, anyone who speaks Arabic and knows what Kibbutz Be'eri means. Kfar Aza and Kisufim. It's funny because they've renamed a lot of these settlements. It's really weird. It's like they've bastardized them from Arabic into Hebrew. Anyway, that's another discussion. Following this, the army launched artillery raids at the border fence area, very close to some of these communities. Shortly afterwards, shells were fired at the Erez border crossing. The IDF says it was not aware of any civilians being hurt in these bombardments. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous because you're saying that you're firing them at some communities, right? So when they say communities, they mean a settler colony, because all of these kibbutz in Hebrew or modern Hebrew means a settler colony. It's a bunch of houses that they've built illegally on top of Palestinian land and populated. So again, contradictions and contradictions. They know what they're firing at. They know these are settlements, and then they say, well, we didn't know we're firing at civilians. What do you mean? I mean, if you say you're not aware of that, there are Israelis, and I've played these clips to you, saying on camera we were hit and shot at by Israeli tanks. So, okay, the IDF can deny it, but Israelis themselves are saying the Israeli tanks fired at me in my house or in my kibbutz and so on. So, I mean, we don't really need the IDF in that case. But anyway, unrestricted fire, okay? So one case in which it is known that civilians were hit, a case that received wide coverage, took place in the house of Pezeshkian. Oh, speak of the devil. I was just talking about that. So that's in Kibbutz Be'eri. 14 hostages were held in the house as the IDF attacked, 13 of them killed. Now that fact, again, if you go on British television and you try to explain this, how dare you, you anti-Semite? How dare you, Hamas propaganda? How dare you? But the Israelis themselves are admitting it. Israelis are eyewitnesses saying, I was shot at by an Israeli tank. Israeli papers are saying, look, they killed 13 out of 14 Israelis. The Israeli army killed 13 out of 14 Israelis. It's so funny how Israeli media can sometimes be more open than in the West. You know why? Because they need money from the West and they need political support from the West. They don't need it from Israelis. They don't give a shit, right? Although there is, again, a whole different level of propaganda inside of Israeli society itself. That's a different topic, but I'm just showing you how weird it is that Western media is sometimes more restricted than Israeli media itself. I mean, they're both controlled by Zionists anyway, so what difference does it make? So, in the coming weeks, the IDF is expected to publish the results of its investigation of this incident, which will answer the question of whether Brigadier General Barak Hiram, the commander of Division 99, who was in charge of operations in Be'eri on October 7, was employing the Hannibal procedure. Did he order the tank to move ahead, even at the cost of civilian casualties, as he stated in an interview he gave later to the New York Times? Well, again, you're just saying that he said that to the New York Times, so yes, he did. Man, I swear to God, it's like Israeli. You can't talk about anything Israeli without contradictions like popping up in the same sentences. Did he order the tank to move ahead even at the cost of civilian casualties as he stated in an interview? Yes, because you just said he stated it in an interview. Why are you asking the question? Over all the months that have passed, the IDF has refused to say whether this procedure was employed against civilians who had been taken hostage. It now seems that even if the answer is positive, the question may have been only a partial one. The actions of Hiram may have simply been congruent with the way the IDF operated that day. So what they're trying to tell you here, they've put it in a very weird way, but I'll translate it for you. They're saying basically they don't even know if these people were hostages. They literally just shot at them. So it's not even Hannibal Directive anymore. It's just standard Israeli policy, right? Standard Israeli practice. The same way they operate anywhere else, in Syria, in Gaza, in the West Bank. Just shoot. Just shoot. Who cares what you're shooting at? Just shoot, right? A very American, a very Israeli way of doing things. That's what they're trying to tell you here. They don't even know if there were hostages there. Just shoot. Right? Because the Hannibal Directive says there have to be hostages. This is something else. It's just standard Israeli practice. As far as Haaretz knows, even at 9:33 p.m., right? So we've gone all the way from 7. We've gone all the way from 7 in the morning to 9 in the evening, right? It's just like massacre the entire day, 24 hours. Right? Okay, well, it's a little more over 12. I'm not going to exaggerate now, but this was still the situation on the ground at 9 in the evening. At that time, there was a further order from Southern Command, close off all the border area with tanks. In fact, all forces in the area received permission to open fire at anyone approaching the border area without any restrictions. There you go, right? So, again, just shoot. Just shoot. The IDF spokesman responded by saying that the army has been fighting for 6 months at high intensity on several fronts, focused on attaining the war's objectives. Really? Because they're doing a very bad job, but okay. In tandem, the IDF has begun conducting internal investigations of what transpired on October 7 and the preceding period. The aim of these investigations is to learn and draw lessons which could be used in continuing the battle. When these investigations are concluded, the results will be presented to the public with transparency. You know, I sometimes loathe the way spokesmen or spokespersons and diplomats speak. It's so ambiguous and abstract. What the fuck are you saying? What does this have to do with anything? You could have said this at any day in the war. is nothing to do with everything we just read. It's the end of the article, by the way. We've reached the end. But anyway, you can essentially interpret this statement by the IDF spokesperson as a denial. So even though we have all these IDF people or IOF people confirming it, the spokesperson is obviously not going to do that because it's too scandalous. But, you know, I find this very funny because he's saying we have to do an investigation. Well, if you have to do an investigation, why did you attack Gaza then when you were so sure of everything that you were saying back then, right? Because you have to understand that, I mean, no matter what they said on October 7, it doesn't justify the genocide. I mean, genocide is it's illegal as an absolute. There is no justification for genocide. Even if someone commits genocide against you, there is no justification for it. It's completely forbidden. It's an absolute. Nevertheless, let me submit to you this thesis that we're just going to pretend the Israelis didn't want to commit genocide, but they just wanted to take back the hostages. Let's go along with their nonsense for a second, all right? Why did you do that if now you're telling us that you've been fighting for 6 months and you still don't know what happened? Because again, it's this typical Israeli contradiction, right? If you've been fighting for 6 months and you don't know what happened, why are you fighting then? Which one is it? Do you know what happened and you're fighting because of that, or you don't know and you should stop? It's really funny. It's really, really funny. But in any case, you know, we come back to the barbarism of Israelis. And again, I hope that in colloquial English and other languages, we start saying Israeli, Zionist instead of Nazi and barbarian. I mean, it's too soft to say Nazi and barbarian. I don't know of people behaving like this in any conflict. And I was just saying that with Professor Marandi. I just don't know. Never heard of this. I'm sure that some people have ordered airstrikes on themselves. Yes, that's happened before in conflict, where someone will order, they're surrounded and they say, come and bomb me and take out the enemy at the same time. That's something completely different, right? And they get posthumous medals and so on. That's different. But for an army to willingly and as a matter of military doctrine, as a matter of policy, bomb its own soldiers and civilians, right? Never, ever seen anything like this. Never, never. And I know my World War II history very, very well. But before so rise of Nazi Germany and World War II itself, never heard of anything like this. Even the Nazis didn't do things like this, right? So that shows you, and they did a lot of depraved things. So that shows you how low the Israelis have fallen. Just really disgusting behavior, but it's perfectly in line and typical of what they do, right? Because if you look at how they target Arabs and Muslims, they do just bomb everyone and shoot at everyone and bomb everything like that. They do that indiscriminately, right? As a matter of almost, you could compare it to carpet bombing, not in the terms of its scale, but the way that it's indiscriminate. So why wouldn't they do that to their own people as well, right? I mean, if you're even putting your people at risk like that, there's something wrong with you. Why would you move from a secure country to Palestine or Lebanon or Syria and live in a war zone, or the West Bank? Why would you even want to live there in the first place? You know that you're living on someone else's land. You know that they're going to fucking kill you and take it back. Why would you even go there? So the whole society is messed up in the head. They willingly commit murder, they steal, and they live on top of the land while they treat the rest of the population like crap, like subhuman, knowing that they are at risk, and they don't care. So the whole population puts itself at risk anyway. So why wouldn't they kill each other for the sake of, you know, perpetuating the colony and making sure that they don't have any hostages captured? Because, you know, when you're saying, okay, I'm going to kill Israelis, you know, who are with me in the army or living next door in a kibbutz, and you kill your own people like that, why are you doing that? What is the goal? Why don't you want them to be taken hostage? Because you're afraid that if they're taken hostage, they will then use you, or rather the Israeli hostages, as something to demand concessions from the Israelis to get Palestinians released. We've had this in the past before. You've had Lebanese resistance fighters kidnap Israeli soldiers, for example, in 2006. But perhaps I should give a better example of in Palestine, where the resistance captured Israeli soldiers and then asked for their prisoners to be released, very much like now. And they got those deals, right? You had 1,000 Palestinians released for one Israeli soldier, right? 1,000 Palestinians for one Israeli soldier. So obviously,
as a Palestinian, you're going to do that knowing the conditions that Palestinians are living in prison. But for an Israeli, like, you know, do you hate the idea of releasing Palestinians so much that you're ready to kill your own people? It's a very interesting concept. I mean, it's pretty fucked up, you know? That's a really, really, really deep hatred. I don't know. Never heard of anything like that. Never, ever heard of anything like that, ever. And then they say that, well, the Hamas and Hezbollah are raising their children to hate Jews. Jesus Christ, man. I think you hate Jews more than anyone else, really. You know, this is something unbelievable. So they did all of this, and they instituted this matter policy because in the past they were so embarrassed by having to release Palestinians from prison. And keep in mind, these are not people that are necessarily convicted. Many Palestinians are held without charge or trial, okay? And they're not even allowed to know why, if there is a charge. So this is administrative detention, but usually there are no charges. It's just a suspicion. It's illegal. It's arbitrary detention. That's number one. A lot of them are tried with military courts. It's a war crime. You can't try civilians in a military court as a matter of policy. If you do it temporarily, that's different, but you can't do it across decades with hundreds of thousands of people, which is what the Israelis have done, which is a war crime. So you have many, many, many Palestinians in prison who have done nothing wrong. And even by Israeli standards, even in Israeli military courts, they haven't been convicted of anything. So they're completely and utterly innocent, even by Israeli standards, which demonize Palestinians. So, you know, imagine how much they hate Palestinians, that to see them, innocent civilians released, they're ready to kill other Israelis just to prevent that. There's something really screwed up with these people. There really is. You know, we also have to say that the propaganda they perpetuated that day about, oh, they came in and they ripped Jews from their beds and killed them, and what utter nonsense. All of the examples in this are military bases. Every single one of these military bases. Okay. And then there was another one with the kibbutz. But the point is that the Israelis killed their own people, and Hamas prioritized military installations. Do you see the difference? Hamas went after the checkpoints, the headquarters, the bunkers and barracks, and the Israelis killed everyone on the Gaza side of the border, on the Israeli side of the border, on the border itself, at the festival, in the military barracks, everyone. They didn't leave a single thing they didn't bomb or kill. So you can see the difference here, and between the military application of how you know Hamas prosecute a war, whereas compared to the Israelis and how they prosecute a war. And I'd also remind you that there was a lot of propaganda about how they raped people, and you know that they burnt babies and they killed pregnant women. Again, I've yet to see a shred of evidence of that. And even just, let's say, a normal killing, right? A quote unquote normal killing, like this, where you're using guns or shells or missiles. We don't know how many of them were actually killed by Hamas. What does that mean? It means that there's a very good chance, given how indiscriminate and how the Israelis have more firepower, there's a very good chance that Israel killed most of the people that day. If you're in the air and you have tanks on the ground and you have surveillance, obviously you can kill more people, and they did. They are saying they fired indiscriminately. They're admitting it. Hamas do not do that. Hamas have never done that. There is no precedent for that. There is precedent for the Israelis. Israelis always kill indiscriminately and bomb indiscriminately, and they're doing it to their own people, and they've done it to their own people. Hannibal Directive is not new. It didn't come out of this episode. So, you know, this is good journalism in this article. It's very good journalism. You know, well done to them, but it's a bit too late. I mean, July 7, wonderful. Where were you on October 7, right? Because the Israelis used a lot of this propaganda to justify the war, which if you think about it, it still doesn't excuse anything. Like, let's say, for example, for argument's sake, that all the propaganda was true. There were rapes. Every single person that day was killed by Hamas. How does that justify genocide? It doesn't. So same thing with weapons of mass destruction. How do weapons of mass destruction justify invading Iraq? France has weapons of mass destruction. Israel has weapons of mass destruction. Why don't you invade them? So none of the propaganda ever justifies the crime anyway. But in addition to that, it's bullshit and it's completely made up. In addition to that. So their pretexts are not even real. They're exactly that. They're pretexts. They're completely made up. nonsense. And the truth always comes out afterwards. So you have the BBC, for example. They go and do a documentary. What was it called? Once Upon a Time in Iraq? I forgot. But they do a documentary in 2020 or 2021 about Iraq. And it's more or less okay. There's some things that I don't agree with. But in any case, the point is they show the civilian toll. Yes? And it's like, okay, well, it's very good that you did this and you interviewed Iraqis and you showed what they went through in the war. Where the fuck were you before the war? Why don't you prevent the war from happening in the first place? Why do you wait till the war is done and all these people have suffered and then you make the documentary about how the reasons behind the war were not real? Motherfucker, you're supposed to do that when it matters, when it counts. You hold the government to account when it counts, not after, when nobody cares, when the government is gone. I don't even know how many governments we've had since then in England. We've changed prime minister like socks. So, it's ridiculous. It's lazy. It's lazy in that regard. So, and this is, I can say the same for this, right? It's good journalism, but the timing of it is lazy. It should have been done when it counted the most, when, all the propaganda in the media was at its height. It was at an apogee, at a climactic point in the mainstream media. And the Western mainstream media always do this to demonize Muslims and Arabs. They always do it. And if they're not doing that, they're doing it to Russians or they're doing it to Vietnamese or the Chinese or whatever, So you have to counter the propaganda when it happens. In any case, good journalism, so some insightful things and insightful details that we didn't have before. But I was telling you back in October that the Israelis killed their own people. They have the Hannibal Directive. They used missiles from the helicopters. The helicopters ran out of munitions. Do you know that? The helicopters that were sent up in the air fired every single thing they had in there, and they were ordered to do that. They were ordered to empty their guns, their cannons, and their missiles, to empty them. All right? We've got the videos of the tanks. We've got the drone footage. We've got the soldiers saying to the papers they shot at their own people. We've got Israelis saying they were shot at by their own people. I mean, what more do you need? What more do you need? And again, even then, why is it wrong for Hamas to attack Israelis? These are military targets. They're legitimate. They're legal under international law. There are very, very few Israeli civilians. How many Israelis are people that are under 18 or grannies and grandfathers who are not in the army? How many of them? Because they're all of the other ones from 18 to 40 years old. You have to go to the army. You're male, you're female, it doesn't matter. You have to go to the army. You are a combatant. By definition, a combatant. Okay? So, they kill tens of thousands of Palestinians and say, oh, well, we have to do that because we're targeting terrorists. Why can't Hamas also kill Israeli civilians? Because they have to target Israeli military targets. Why is it okay for Zionists to do that and Americans to do that, but it's not okay for Palestinians to have collateral damage? They don't get to have collateral damage? And especially in a society where every man and woman has to join the army? It's a society of combatants. And the ones that are not in the army all have guns at home. They got settlers shooting Palestinians with impunity. You can literally, I swear to God, if you're a Jew from Morocco or Britain, you can get on a plane this second and go to Israel, get nationality, get an illegal house in the West Bank, and get a rifle and murder a Palestinian on camera in front of Israeli soldiers, and you will not go to prison. That is a fucking fact. And that society needs to be dismantled. It's a cancer. And it produces this. So there you go. There you go. Again, guys, I implore you to please donate to these Palestinian charities. There are disabled children in Gaza. You can literally help these children this second right now by donating to them. I know the organizer of the fundraiser, the money buys wheelchairs and other medical equipment that is difficult to get, and it will go to them directly right now. So please donate if you can. I'm going to put it up on the screen. This is one charity or one fundraiser. Okay, so it's this one on GoFundMe. Look at that, almost at the goal. You guys took this from 6,000 to 72,000. Thank you so much. Really, thank you. And please help them get to the goal so those children can be helped out. Many of them are victims of this war and the previous wars, and the Israelis used chemical weapons. They used white phosphorus. They used depleted uranium, and a lot of these children are born, or they they're exposed to, so they're born with genetic issues because of the corruption in the DNA that occurs from exposure to uranium and white phosphorus. Just like in Iraq, you have this problem in Fallujah. It seeps into the ground. And you have people that are born today in 2024 who have congenital heart issues. You actually have the highest rate of congenital heart disease in birth defects in Fallujah than in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, just to give you an idea of how serious it is. So in Gaza, I don't know how it compares to Fallujah, but it is bad because those chemical weapons are being used there in addition to who knows what. So you have other children that are disabled in different ways, that have limbs missing or being maimed. So please help them if you can. This will go to them. It's a trustworthy link and fundraiser. And I've got another one for you in Palestine, not in Gaza, but in Palestine. It's a Christian charity. And there's another Christian charity as well. So this is dspr.org and there's shepherd-society.org. Also both trustworthy donations and fundraisers that you can contribute to right now. So I'll post them in the chat. And thank you guys very, very much. And if you're able to afterwards, please support the show. It goes a long way and it's very, very much appreciated. Again, I thank you guys for tuning in. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Ma salame. Bye-bye.
A is for
all men and women created by you know the thing.
B is for
I'm beginning to see why your wife left you.
C is for
Corn Pop was a bad dude, and he ran a bunch of bad boys.
D is for
Don't worry, I'm so serious. Children, I love to hear them.
E is for
Excuse to walk by the dealer and say, no, I'm not going to be a mule. I got something to do. I got to go do boom, boom, boom.
F is for
Friend, and she's a friend. She's been my friend in and out of public life.
G is for
Go to Joe 30330.
H is for
Hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun, and the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down.
I is for
I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate.
J is for
Let's look at the record.
I have President Biden, Vice President Biden.
Well, I tell you what, if you look at my record and you still doubt about my commitment, then you should vote for somebody else.
K is for
Kids jumping on my lap, and I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
L is for
The lion, dog, face, pony soldier.
M is for
Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night, the phone. Make sure the kids hear words.
N is for
NATO.
O is for
The only African-American woman that's ever been elected to the United States Senate.
P is for
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
R is for
Rest her soul, and although your mom's still alive.
S is for
Send a text to the word united.
T is for
Truth over facts.
U is for
Union workers, the UAW took incredible cuts in their future.
V is for
All right, thanks so much.
W is for
Wait, you're getting nervous, man. Calm down. It's okay.
X is for
Xi Jinping.
Y is for
And you ain't black.
Z is for
You sleeping? Women in our country has been classified as essential. So this is an issue.
By the way, this is my little sister Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband. Oh no, this is you switched on me. This is my wife. This is my sister. They switched on me.